So let's talk about GNU Hurd. So for us, it's a bit all about freedom zero. That is the ability to use software, basically, for any purpose. And for us, the important thing is that you shouldn't have to ask the system administrator for things. You should be allowed to do whatever you want. So for instance, why is fdisk, mk2fs, etc. Hidden in /sbin? I want to be able to build disk images, play with them, mount them, etc. So just be able to work with the kind of disk and network access I have and do whatever I want with this. So it's about freedom to innovate as well. If I want to use an experimental file system, just play with it without being afraid of crashing the machine. You should be able to just run the file system and let the system administrator be happy with this because it's safe to do this. And also it's a way to provide freedom from misbehaving programs like a driver which doesn't work so well or some things like this. So just to give an idea, in GNU Hurd, so you have the kernel, which does basically almost nothing, just managing tasks, the memory and inter-process communications. And then you have a lot of daemons doing the actual stuff. So the PFINet is the TCP IP stack. X2FS does the file system thing. And then you have the user just running programs. And these tools just talk to the daemons through the microkernel. The microkernel doesn't do much. It just passes requests along. So for instance, if a server crashes, then that's fine. For instance, a driver crashes or hangs, you just can kill it, and then PFINet will reopen a new instance of the driver, and it will just work thanks to TCP just continuing to ping the other computer. So it's just an error. It's not something of the death. At some point, on my desktop, I could switch off the light and then that would crash my laptop because switching off the light would reboot my hard disk, USB hard disk, and then the kernel of the laptop wouldn't like this. This is not something which is supposed to happen. So with a server approach, this is completely fixed. It's also easier to debug. It's really nice to be able to GDB a TCP IP stack. When there is something happening in there, just run GDB. You can JPROF it, etc. You can also dare more crazy things. For instance, the Linux console doesn't support much because we don't want to put too much complex code in there. On GNU Hurd, the console actually supports things like Chinese and double width support, etc., which is not supported by the Linux console. And that's right, because you don't want to put too crazy stuff. Here, since it's just a user-learned program, then you're fine. And so we do have Chinese support in actually text mode in the Debian installer. Okay, so just to show an example, so here I have FTPFS, which uses the TCP IP stack to actually mount a remote directory, and then I can use ISOFS to mount an ISO image which is inside that FTP server, and then I can just let CP copy a file from the ISO image which is on the server. So this translates that way. So I've done this command a long time ago just to say that FTP colon in my home directory is whatever FTP, and then I can take tilde FTP / etc. a URL and give that to ISOFS and then mount that on my MNT, and then I can just browse inside the ISO image without having to download the whole ISO image, without having to ask root for this kind of things, etc. And I can also permanently store this in X2FS. So just to give an example, I have a translator on my signature file, which just codes fortune. So when I cut .signature I get one signature or another, because each time I open the file, it's a new instance of Fortune which is started. So you can see that indeed this is stored in my signature file. So this is fun. Another example, as a user, I can start my own TCP/IP stack and tell it to use a virtual network interface, and then put the TCP/IP service on some node in my home. And then I can run OpenVPN to actually put and push and pull packages from that virtual interface and build a VPN with somewhere else. And then I can remap the system, what is supposed to be the system TCP/IP stack, into my own socket. And then I get a new shell for which the system TCP/IP stack is actually my own TCP/IP stack. And so I can decide which program actually use this TCP/IP stack, and just do my own VPN without having to ask anything to the administrator. But also, for instance, it happens quite often that you have a binary, maybe not SH, but like Python or Perl or whatever. You have a program which wants /bin/sh to be actually bash or whatever. So I want to change this, and so I can remap this. So for instance, if I look at sh, so as usual, oh, it's green, but you can see here it's dash, and if I remap bin sh into bin bash, for instance, I get a new shell where actually sh, is not the same, so it's remapped into /bin/bash, and so it's actually bash, which shows up here. So I do really choose how I work, what my environment looks like. And for instance, I can even remap the whole /bin directory into my own directory where I expose /bin, but also other things, so that programs which have /bin/something hard-coded into them, I can use them without having to ask the administrator to install stuff inside /bin. So it's kind of interesting. It's a bit like Stow Nix gigs, but done in a nice way. So how does it work? Well, it's actually relatively simple in the principle. It's simply that libc doesn't talk with the kernel or whatever. It always uses RPCs, so to ask nicely about opening files, etc. And so it's really natural in GNU Hurd that you can redirect things. So for instance, the remap and translator here is like maybe 200, 300 lines, because it's just a matter of you open a file, okay, I look at the file path, is it something I want to translate? Yes, I translate that, and then I open the real file and give the new handle to the program, and that's all. So it's extremely simple. So everything in GNU Hurd is an RPC, and so it is interposable. And then translators get exposed inside the file system. So we have seen the TCP/IP stack. It's just a path inside the file system. And then the user can decide whatever it wants to do, to interpose whatever. So for instance, fake root in Linux is quite big, because it has to interpose libc symbols. And every time libc invents something new, then it breaks in fake root, because fake root has to know about this new symbol, etc. And interpose them, so either through ptrace or ld or whatever. In GNU Hurd, fake root is like 1,000 lines long, because it just implements a few basic things, and then everything just works. We just interpose basic authentication hooks, and libc uses them all the time. So it's fully virtualizable and with a really fine-grained interface, because you can precisely decide which RPC I interpose, or which file in the file system I interpose. And then you can just use your home directory, the TCP/IP stack, and pile stuff over it the way you want. So just to give a crazy example, so we have a lot of stuff. So I actually have an ISO image inside a partition disk image on FTP over a VPN. And this is not so crazy. Maybe the ISO image inside a partition disk, the ISO image is a bit too much, but one file inside a partition disk image on FTP over VPN, it's not so crazy, because maybe you're on a hostile network, so you have to use a VPN, and then you want to access a file you know is inside a disk image, I don't know, an ARM-based disk image, which is provided on a public FTP server, and you don't want to download the whole image just to get, I don't know, the README file or something like this. So it's not so crazy, and it just works nicely. So a bit more Debian stuff. Porting packages into Hurd is quite easy in principle, because it's just a POSIX system. There is a lot more than just a POSIX, but it provides a POSIX interface. So portable programs should be really fine. Just for fun, some dumb issues. So for instance, some programs think that if it's not Linux or BSD, then they can include Windows.h. Why not? If the system has mar.h, that must be macOS, because macOS is the only system in the world that uses mar. I don't know why. Some people try to grab CPU info, which doesn't exist on GNU Hurd yet, and so they basically just run make -j, which just explodes the system. I mean, even on a Linux system, it's just the same, unless it's a small program, but with a lot of C++ files, it's horrible. Some people include limits.h from Linux instead of just the standard one. Well, a problematic thing is people who hardcode Erno values. The values of Erno are not standardized, so you shouldn't hardcode them like in test suite results or things like this. And quite often in configure, it's hardcoded that only Linux knows about LP threads or LDL, etc. So quite often programs are not generic enough, and that's just easy to fix, but we have more and more of this. So we have a portal page developing a bit more about this. I wanted to talk a bit more about pathmax. So it is allowed, it is not defined on GNU Hurd for a very good reason, and it is allowed by POSIX not to define this, just to say that there is no limitation on the pathmax value. We don't have a limit on the size of the path, and indeed it has a fragile semantic. It has never meant a reasonable size for an array of characters to store a path. On Linux, it's 4,000. That's a whole page. That's a whole TLB entry for just one file name. It's extremely costly. Most people don't have so long path, and so it's really a pity to use so much memory, because it's always a whole page, because it will be always a line on 4K, etc. So, well, that's a waste for one. And path can actually be longer. There is no strict limitation. You can mkdir something, cd into that, mkdir again, cd, etc. You can do that as much as you want. There's no limitation on this. It's just that when you call get current working directory, you won't get it in completely. And actually, some programs misbehave in that case, because they won't see these files. They will be quite actually hidden or protected, or I don't know. You cannot remove them just giving the path. You have to cd, 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 and then you can access the file. And for no reason, actually, because Linux inside doesn't have such limitation, actually. And also, it's stupid, but POSIX didn't really say precisely whether the final /0 actually is included in pathmax or not. So people would allocate pathmax +1, or maybe not. So we have a lot of code which doesn't maybe actually work, but nobody tests it actually, because they don't never have so long path. So I'm a bit afraid of all this code using pathmax. So you should be afraid as well. just to give an overview of the state, so we have a 386 support. We have a 64-bit support which has started, so we have the kernel booting, and now it's mostly translating between 32 and 64 in our PCs. We have drivers for network boards as a userland translator using the DD layer. So we have disk, we have accent port. We have a preliminary sound support which was announced today using rump, the rump kernel. We don't have USB yet. It is quite stable. I haven't reinstalled my boxes for like a decade. I don't remember when I installed them, actually. And the buildy machines just keep building packages for weeks without a problem. We have 81% of the archive. We have the native Debian installer working, which is really working great. Recent work is interesting thing is a distributed mTab translator to provide /proc/mounts in a Hurdish way. We have quite a few optimizations which went in to improve the performance. We had a release quite some time ago. I really recommend to have a look at this one. It's fun. So we released some Wheezy and Jessie snapshots. They are not official, but for us, it's really an official thing. And the important thing I wanted to discuss this week is the removal from FTP master. So this is due since quite a few years now. Honestly, it's really not useful to mirror the Hurd packages over the whole world because there are not even as many users as the number of mirrors. So okay, that's fine for just a removal from the main archive in terms of mirroring, but then we have a lot of consequences. So for instance, build.debian.org is really an important thing because that is where the release team schedules transitions. And losing this for us would be really tedious work because I've been there doing actually the transition work, the same work as the release team, and it's extremely painful to do this again. So we would really like to have a solution for this. So maybe get that fed from Debian ports, and then that's fine. We can be on Debian ports as long as at least there is some synchronization between something. And also getting exposed on the buildy package status page so that people are aware that there is some port which is failing. And maybe they are keen on spending some time on it, maybe not. That's fine, but at least get them know about it. And also a corner thing, when we have a version upgrade like GCC or Perl, the release team ask, okay, we'll have to upgrade the build this, and at the moment they don't even have an account on them, so they cannot check whether the version is good or not. So maybe we should just provide an account. We just need to know who we need to give an account to. So basically, my idea would be, okay, that's fine not being on FTP master. The thing is, we still want to have most of the support of Debian to make our life less a burden as much as possible without any extra load on the release team, etc. We do understand well that we don't want to put work on people's hand, but we would like to still get some benefit, and probably there are solutions for this. And conversely, all this, I mean, not putting more work on us Hurd porters would actually be the same solutions that existing ports on Debian ports would be really happy to have to improve their life, to have less work to do than they really currently have. It's really a problem. So maybe we want to think about a real status for second-class citizens, so like Hurd, but also the Spark, HPPA, etc. So maybe we want to have some both at some time, so we can gather and discuss about this. Okay, so future work. Interesting thing is probably the most interesting thing is probably using the rump drivers because at the moment we use DDE, but it's not really going forward. We thought it would be a way to get newer drivers, Linux drivers, without extra effort, but it doesn't actually happen at the moment. While RUMP does go forward, we see work being done with Xen, etc. So this is probably a long-term solution. Maybe we'll have another distribution through Geeks. This is progressing. We are quite far from doing this. So for now, Debian is really the only Hurd distribution that we have. So we'll see. And of course, just come and have fun with your pet project. Just join. Thanks.
Any quick questions before we run to lunch?
Hello. I just wondered if you're using Hurd. Oh, I wondered if you're using Hurd on that laptop with you there to give the presentation.
Yeah, this is running Hurd, yes.
So it's quite like usable every day.
Well, not every day, because without USB you cannot mount a USB stick, for instance. So that's quite inconvenient. But yeah, I could probably use it every day. I don't. I mean, for work, I cannot afford this. But yeah, also we don't have wireless drivers at the moment. We hope that with the RAM drivers we would get this. So yes, some people do use it every day. Not me.
But those
yes.
would be the major things missing for more people to be able to use it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks.
Any more questions? If there are no more questions, then thanks again.
Thanks.
Right, and I think we're out to lunch.
Okay.